We're live.
Okay, are we good then?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Pinole Planning Commission regular meeting. It's Monday, March 28th at 7 p.m. We are still meeting via Zoom video conference due to the state of California's declaration of emergency. And we are holding this video conference pursuant to AB 361. The City Council actually is going back to hybrid meetings, and our next commission meeting will be hybrid as well. Ways that you can watch this meeting. You can watch it live on channel 26. You can access that via the city's website at www.ci.pinole.ca.us. And it is also being video streamed at that website. If none of these options are available to you or you need assistance with public comment, please contact David Hannum, who is the planning manager, at 510-724-8912 or dhanham@ci.pinole.ca.us. You may participate with a public comment, and you can do that via Zoom, or the information is from a PC, Mac, or iPad, or iPhone, or Android. You can access this by https //us02web.zoom.us/j/87637149010, or that is the webinar ID 876-3714-9010 at zoom.us/join. You may also access by phone at 1-669-900-6833. Speakers will be asked to provide their name. We'll get to that when we get to public comment. Any comments you can submit to planning staff during the meeting via email, again, dhanham@ci.pinole.ca.us. Am I missing anything before we move to the call to order?
Nope.
Okay, then let's go ahead and call this meeting to order, and we can recite the Pledge of Allegiance together. I pledge allegiance
To the
flag
of the United
of the United States of America,
and
to the republic which stands
one
nation
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And I'd also like to have a land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Mr. Hannum, could we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Menez? He's here. Commissioner Martinez?
Here.
Commissioner Benzuli? He's absent, and he did notify me prior to the meeting. Commissioner Wong?
Here.
Commissioner Current?
Here.
Vice Chair Moriarty?
Present.
Chair Benuelos? Absent. We have members of the commission, so we can act on any items if need to tonight. So
great. Thank you very much for that. So under citizens to be heard, the public may address the Planning Commission on items that are within its jurisdiction and not otherwise listed on the agenda. Planning commissioners may discuss the matter but by state law, action must be deferred to a future meeting. The time allowed is 5 minutes each. Mr. Hannum, do we have any citizens to be heard?
I don't have any emails, and I'm checking with Justin if Justin has anybody on the phone with him.
No, there's no one on the line right now.
Perfect. Okay. So we can move forward.
Okay. Then in the future, you may submit comments to Mr. Hannum as following the directions that are on the screen right now. But let's go ahead and move to the meeting minutes. Do I have a motion regarding the minutes from our February 28th meeting?
I have a brief inquiry regarding the minutes before we move to a motion, if we could.
Please.
Towards the end of the minutes, I believe on page 6, line 8, it talks about Vice Chairperson Moriarty inquired about the status of creating objective standards, and that Mr. Hannum anticipated information we presented to the Planning Commission at a meeting in March. So is there still a plan to present information to us on objective standards, or is it just the Parklets that's basically going to be the objective standards we're looking at?
Well, the Parklets is just one aspect of it, of when we create. Right now, we don't have Parklets as part of our plan. But if we do decide tonight that that's something that we want to do, then we would create objective standards for the creation of these guidelines when we put the Parklet program together. So, yeah, I mean, it will be we'll be taking a look at all of our different zoning districts and everything in terms of development standards to make sure we have objective standards, and those will be coming to you. I just wasn't able to get those to you this month. So I'm hoping we're starting with Parklets, but we'll be bringing things over the course of the next few meetings and for you guys to take a look at. So, and what we need and to follow the next set of processes.
Okay, most of the stuff in the minutes, I just figured it was various projects getting shuffled around of a timing, but I was curious about that in particular since I wasn't sure if there was a time constraint on objective standards or not.
Mr. Hannum, I do believe that there was an end of March time deadline to get objective standards to the state. And that was part of the discussion and the question, especially relating to SB 9. But I'm not sure if discussing it during the minutes is the right place. If we can discuss that afterwards, we
can discuss that later.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Menes, for bringing that up. And let's make sure that we do address this at the end of the meeting, right during the reports, so we can make sure that we're in complete understanding of where we are regarding those objective standards. Does anyone else have any other comments?
Other than I made it here finally.
Okay.
Mr. Banuelos. All right.
Thanks. Sorry, Chris. Busy for work.
Hardly hear you, Tim.
What?
I can hardly hear you.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can tune it up.
Okay.
Okay, Chair Banuelos, do you want to call for the approval of the minutes?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Barely, but yeah, I mean, I can hear you, but it's still relatively low.
Okay. Let me fiddle with this. Can you take care of this, Ann, while I fiddle with my...
Yes, I'll do that. If there are no other comments regarding the minutes from the February 28th meeting, could I entertain a motion to accept those minutes?
I'll make a motion. Dave Current. I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that for you, Dave.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Then let's go ahead and have a roll call vote. I believe we need to.
Commissioner Menes?
Yes.
Commissioner Martinez?
Yes.
Commissioner Wong?
Yes.
Commissioner Current,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moriarty,
Yes.
Chair Banuelos.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
I just want to confirm that Commissioner Wong was able to watch the meeting from last week so that he could approve these minutes.
That is correct. Yeah, I did watch the video.
Excellent. Thank you so much for confirming that, Commissioner Wong. Chair Banuelos, are you ready to go?
Well, trying. Let's just
That
go
sounds
ahead
good.
and go for it here. Let's see. Okay, so the Planning Commission minutes, and we don't have any public hearings, no old business, and we have new business, parklet design, discussion of concepts for parklet standards and design guidelines. So David, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chair Willis. Tonight we're talking about parklet design. As you're aware, with the current onset of the pandemic, the City Council adopted an emergency ordinance to allow for outdoor dining permits, which are pretty much with a temporary use permit. There were approximately, there's actually 20 businesses, not 205, 20 businesses that took advantage of the temporary use permits, and there's currently about 4 or 5 that still have their outdoor dining areas. The only one that really represents what a parklet is the one at Sue's Cafe right on the onset of Pear Street. All of the other, what we consider parklets, are within existing parking lots of those particular restaurants. Like in Mel's Diner, it's in the parking lot. In Applebee's, it was in the parking lot. In Antlers, it's in the parking lot. Tina's is in the parking lot. So they're all necessarily in the parking lots of the projects. When we talk about parklets, they are basically small sidewalk extensions of what we know of parklets. Are that they're small sidewalk extensions intended to provide amenities and green space and recreational to the public. Now, they usually are constructed to encompass areas of one or more typical parking stalls. Hey, Dave, do you have my PowerPoint? Is that ready to go? Can we go to that? Because I'm going to go to that. Perfect. Okay. And kind of just jump ahead. The city is in the beginning stages of developing parklet regulations, design guidelines. Staff's identified several topic areas and examples of some considerations used in the parklet guidelines of other jurisdictions. We used probably about 4 or 5 jurisdictions that we took a look at, and we invite the commissioners for feedback on guidelines and standards they may desire to see in the future for parklet design within Pinole in order to develop the parklet regulation and guidelines. So we went over some categories in terms of the analysis consideration as part of the discussion tonight, and looked at different amenities such as safety and aesthetics and cost and economic development. Staff has recommended the Planning Commission direct the Planning Ad Hoc Design Committee to work with staff on developing policies and guidelines for the parklets in the city of Pinole. But if we can go to the next slide, Dave. So basically, again, what is a parklet? Parklets are small sidewalk extensions. They're usually constructed to encompass the area of a typical parking stall and are open to any member of the public. So when you do parklets, it's not like, okay, this parklet's for Tina's and this one's for Bear Claw, this one's for, they're all for all the businesses that are within the area that they're using the stall. They're basically, the purpose of community parklets is to maximize the sense of community by utilizing the public space. So if we go to the next slide, Dave. And this is kind of an example. This is a diagonal with diagonal stalls. And you can kind of see how it is an extension. And this one's kind of labeled that basically it should be a minimum of 6-foot clearance for the next closest parking stall. So it has distances between the next set of parking stalls. It talks about having reflective posts, and we can get into that a little later. But I just kind of want to give you an idea of what parklets are. If you go to the next slide, Dave. This is what we normally see. What you'll see in terms of sidewalk, and you'll see the parklet along the sidewalk. and it kind of has the street, the direction of it's always in the direction of travel, the cars, and basically the lanes, and in the parking areas. Well, we would normally be able to parallel park. That's what where those areas would be. Okay, if you go to the next slide, Dave. So these are some of the barriers that are used to help protect. Because as you're aware, I mean, some of these parklets and some of the other communities are right out in the middle of the street, and there has to be some type of protection for those that are sitting down, they're eating dinner, eating their meals, or just sitting, congregating, doing. And so these are different types of barriers that have been used in different parklet areas over the place. You have the heavyweight barriers, which is your concrete, typical K-rail. You've got your plastic traffic barriers that are usually filled with something. Your parking stops, wood barriers, granite or concrete blocks. And we're talking, these are like 250-pound blocks. So these aren't just your typical blocks you get at the store. And of course, the planters, same type of thing. These are your 250-pound, 300-pound planters that help outline the areas, outline the area of your parklet. So, and of course, lightweight barriers that are like usually in between the heavyweight barriers, either metal railings, some use plastic netting, some use rope. You can kind of see on the corner one that kind of gets creative on different styles of what you can do, lattice, bamboo curtains. So there's a lot of different samples and textures that you can use to make these parklets. You go to the next slide, Dave. Okay, now this is kind of where we're getting to kind of a standard. In most cases, it's a continuation of the sidewalk. So what has to happen is the gap you see is for the drainage to be maintained. None of the parklets are just solid that butt up against the sidewalk. Usually it's a platform that's based. You can kind of see the ramps are kind of flush with the curve in the sidewalk. And that area below, that 6-inch by 12-inch, that's usually a drainage area. So drainage can get underneath it, and it's not obstructed. So it's reached out. And that's a sample from the San Francisco Parklet manual, right out of their manual. So that's what they require as part of the parklets. Okay, Dave, you go to the next slide. And of course, to kind of give you an example of what it is. So as you can see in this area, where the edge of the sidewalk is, you can kind of see they've used some heavy planters on the edge, along with some wood barriers along the side. And of course, it's basically a parking stall. It's taking up probably 2 or 3 parking stalls along a street. If you go to the next slide, Dave. Here's some other examples of parklets using diagonal parking. You see the barrier, we kind of have the little barriers with the reflective sticks to kind of let the public know we're there, as well as got some more of a wood barrier, and kind of with some landscaping, kind of hides the people behind there, kind of protects them from vision for the cars and that. You can kind of see again on the bottom, same type of thing. They're using planters. You can kind of see the lattice or the baling in between with some planters in between to just kind of offset. And again, to get the people off the right of way and into areas for their own quote recreational areas. If you go to the next slide, that one kind of got blurred, but yeah, this is another type of parklet where you can kind of see has a sign where it says public parklet. And that's something that we would regulate as well in terms of signage of what would be allowed there on there. And of course, it just again shows kind of the wood and the planters as well. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of regulations, these are some of the cities that we used to take a look at these regulations and guidelines. And I found it interesting that you can kind of see, San Francisco, of course, it's a 64-page parklet program. It's got all the rules and regulations that you need. Contra Costa County is a 42-page parklet program. And then you have like the city of Alameda. It's a 3-page program, outlines what you can and can't do. And that's about it. Walnut Creek, more of a 21-page. And then Berkeley doesn't have really a separate have a separate parklet program. They just created a chapter within the municipal code that covered parklets. So it's the same type of design standards and those. So if we go to the next page, Dave, I think is that the last one. Okay, if you could go back a couple. I want to go back. Okay, yeah, I want to go back to that one because that one gives you a good example of what diagonal is. If we have diagonal parking, which I don't think we have any diagonal parking anywhere in the downtown. All of ours is parallel or 90-degree parking or parallel with the street. So, which would be similar to the ones on the side. So, I mean, in terms of guidelines, I mean, when analyzing, well, I'm gonna take a look at just like the safety and traffic. When we talk about reviewing parklets in other areas, they looked at speed limits, working with the Public Works Department in terms of the safety concerns addressed by applicants. The use of parking, consider they generally cover one or more parking or 3 or 4 angle spaces. You can kind of see this one takes usually 2 or 3 angle spaces. So also they use wheel stops. Now these don't, but some would actually use wheel stops where the reflector banners are. They would have some wheel stops there, some raised wheel stops. And it looks like on this one, on the diagonal, they don't have really any stoppage. They just have the parklet itself. They looked at making sure that these parklets don't obstruct impeding access to utilities or hydrants or drain inlets. So we need to make sure that when we're placing these parklets, that we're not placing them, in front of drain inlets or any of those things where our Public Works Department can't get to, or fire hydrants where our fire department they can't get to some of those, or it makes it harder to get to those utility accesses by having the parklet right there. Also, in terms of edge visibility, that is probably one of the most important. As you can see, the 3 reflectors that show that there's something there, and there's also the reflectors on the wood side. You can kind of see those little dots of reflectors on the side. That's very important to identify, especially in the dark. Now, some communities have permanent type of parklets. Other communities have what they call portable, which means they lock them in. They pretty much lock them in like in the spring and summer, and they take them out during the fall and winter to create more parking throughout the downtown. Usually usually for Christmas, or you can acquire more parking for like the Christmas season, and then they bring them out in the spring and the summer, and they lock them. They have a place where they can lock them in. So, but most of them are permanent. But you can have quote portable parklets as well. They have to be ADA compliant, so they have to be ADA accessible. And we have to make sure the transition is flush with the curb, and you can kind of see on both of these how the one parklet comes up onto the curb. So I'm assuming there's a set. Dave, maybe if you go back to go back one slide. Yeah, you can kind of see the continuation of the sidewalk and where that comes over and meets, and you can see the continuation of the sidewalk there. And of course, lighting will be very important. Some have those type of the new lighting that you can get like at Costco that have the little bulbs, and they light them around. They light them up a little bit, so again they're noticeable. You can see them. And of course, furniture. All of the furniture in most of the cities require the furniture be able to move out and into like a storage area or we have an agreement with the businesses to move the furniture in, or you can basically screw them down. There's no, and make some of the bigger tables and heavier stuff where you just can't just pick them up. It would take a whole 3, 4, 5, 6 people to pick one up to take them away. So they should be weighted down. Let's see what else. In terms of aesthetics, in terms of ways to bring value to parklet, they're talking about, we looked at designs could include beautification elements such as landscaping, artwork, innovative architecture. As you can see on this one, Dave, go to the next slide. Again, yeah, you can kind of see the architecture in some of these. They can look any way we want them to look. We can, so that's something that we can do as part of acquiring the. Excuse me. as part of that, as part of the aesthetics, and also to include some signage or make sure that the signage represents what we wanted to see say on the parklets. Parklet, Main Street Avenue Parklet, something of that nature, San Pablo Avenue Parklet, or something that identifies what it is. If we want to do like for business names, like sometimes some of them have like on the ends on the wood one, they would have like little placards for like businesses that that could sponsor a parklet. That's another way of doing that, of getting some advertising that could actually sponsor and help the city build these things if we wanted to. And in some cases, you can kind of see the umbrellas. Some of them do have quote ceilings. And again, those are more of your more permanent parklets. As you can see, this one on the right-hand side on this drawing, or this plan, they don't have any. It's just a place where you can just sit down. They don't have any overhead or anything like that. But you can kind of see the umbrellas. And I think if you go back one slide, Dave, please. Thank you. No, that's just landscaping and trees. Most of them don't have roofs, because most of them, they're just, they can withstand the elements, so to speak. But some do. Some you can't have roofs, and we can, as part of the guidelines, we can set the guideline or design standard if we allow them to have roofs of what those look like. So, in terms of costs of some of these costs, most of the costs would be borne by the applicant who would want to propose to have a parklet once the guidelines are established. We would have application and user fees that would be developed with the program. And basically what we would take a look at is city review, permit issuance or renewal fees, planning, public works, police, fire reviews, and then maintenance costs, consider requiring a maintenance plan, briefly describing how the owner would maintain it. But even if the owner puts it in, it won't be just for that property owner. It would be for the public would be able to use that, and in most cases. So that's kind of how that works. With that pretty much ends my presentation. I mean, I could have gone much more in detail in terms of what other cities are doing. They all are pretty much the same in the sense that they all have requirements for what they look like. They all have standards, sizes, how many they use. And I think if this is something that we really want to dive into, I think if we get the ad hoc committee involved and really start developing guidelines for these, if this is something that the commission wants to proceed with and wants to move forward with, we can take a look at designs and where we can put parklets and all that. I mean, most of these, as you can see, they're kind of like in downtown areas. If you go to the next slide, Dave, again, I'm sorry. Go to the next. They don't look like they're on busy streets, but I mean, they could be. I mean, I'm not quite sure. I know the ones in Livermore, they're on a main drag. They have those. I didn't get there, but that's another city that we can take a look at as well. So, that's pretty much what I have for a brief outline and what we want to do with parklets. If you have any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer those and we can move forward.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I think we'll start with questions, and I'm going to start with Raphael. Any questions?
Raphael, you were picked by him.
I didn't have my audio turned up high enough to hear. My apologies. So a couple points. First, can this presentation be uploaded to the city's website to go along with the agenda, since I don't think it was part of the agenda packet?
Yeah, it will be.
And secondly, when I was looking around the internet to see what various other jurisdictions did, I found some parklet design guidelines that were released relatively recently, I think in January of 2022 by the City of Pleasanton. Pretty short document, just 3 pages worth of bullet points. Yeah. And one of the points they had on platform design seemed like it was their whole platform design segment seemed worthwhile. It was platform must be freestanding, can't make permanent alterations to the street, don't pour concrete onto the street, don't bolt platforms into the street. platform can't inhibit drainage or stormwater, so there has to be a gap underneath the platform, and the platform should allow maintenance underneath the parklet through a modular design, removable screws, or another method to allow for leaf removal and the like. So I thought in particular the design constraint to allow for maintenance is something that we should consider, because there's definitely the potential issue, especially with the more permanent parklets of, how do we get at stuff that builds up under the parklet and make sure it stays clean.
Right.
That's all for now.
David, Curran?
Yes, thank you, Tim. I'm a little bit confused on the ownership of the parklets, because during the presentation, it appeared that the parklets were community parklets that were available for anybody, but yet we're telling the applicant that they have to bear the cost of the construction of the parklet. So my question to the staff is, are these parklets dedicated to one business, the one who pays for it, or can anyone use them? Like if there's like two restaurants and next to each other and one builds a parklet and the other one says, oh, yeah, we're going to use it too, and without paying for it, is that something that you envision? And also, along the same line, it's real obvious how this works for restaurant businesses to have parklets, but do you envision any other businesses utilizing parklets, like like an apparel business or an art business or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, if they were, we would definitely have to, because that'd be outdoor display and outdoor that. We would have to regulate that to make sure what they are able to put out in their parklet area. I mean, in most cases, these are used for restaurants or gathering places, and so usually when the businesses apply, usually it's a couple businesses that go in together in a lot of cases. Where they go in, like if there are a couple of restaurants near each other, they all go in. One will be the applicant, but they'll all go in. And usually what will happen is, as we process those, we will set up a maintenance plan with businesses that apply for those. But in most cases, I don't think you can, if you're using the public right of way, you can't limit who can use it and who can't use it. But like I said, some businesses, like, they'll go in together and create one. As you can see, the one on the left hand, that's a pretty big parklet. I mean, that's taking up almost probably 3 or 4 parallel spots. I mean, that's almost 40 feet long. So I mean, that can cover a lot of businesses. The same with this one on the bottom, kind of sort. You can kind of see. I mean, it's a good probably 3, 4, 5 spaces worth of parklet, and you can see there's a number of restaurants that could use it. So, or a number of businesses that would be able to use it. In most cases, when we were talking about having parklets, most of the idea was that, because like most of the parklets we have now, or what I call outdoor dining areas, are all from restaurants. There wasn't any from like a retail establishment or anything of that nature. It was purely eating. But not to say that they couldn't. If a couple of retail shops wanted to get together and put one out there and for gathering or that kind of stuff. A similar area they've done it in their own, but they've done it in their own area, is the Safeway Project. They created their own little, what I would consider a parklet area, because they created a gathering point. They created a spot within the development where people can just go and sit. And it's not just for one business, it's for all the businesses that are along that strip area. That's how most of these are envisioned. When you're doing this, you're envisioning that people can, there's 3 or 4, 5, 6 tables in there, and people can go and sit down and, and read or do whatever they really want to eat. So it's really for the community as well as the individual businesses.
Okay, I think the water is very muddy there. I kind of envisioned that during the pandemic that there was a real need for parklets because of the fact that we had restrictions about going into restaurants and other places of businesses, because of and wearing masks and COVID. But it seems to me like, because as you point out, the right of way belongs to the public, but yet we're charging people to build them, which can be utilized by other businesses. And I think that's kind of something that I don't think the builders of Parklets really appreciate. I'm beginning to think that maybe this is an idea that was great during the pandemic, but its use kind of diminishes as we hopefully move from the pandemic, especially when it's on public streets. I can still see that these would be great in where there's in a private parking lots or something like that to have them. But I'm kind of leaning towards maybe this is an idea that was important the last 2 years, but creates a can of worms as we go forward. And that's just my thought there. The other questions I have is like, I know La Familia had a parklet out in front of it that it was removed. I think the owner said that the city made him take it down. Can you elaborate on why that little parklet in front of La Familia is no longer there?
Well, it was an outdoor dining. They wanted to do, it was a combination of things. One is that they wanted to do a temporary outdoor dining area during the pandemic. And so we allowed them based on their submittal, which was very, very limited in terms of what we required in terms of submittals. I mean, it was just pretty much give me a drawing and where you're locating it, and you can pretty much have it. What they were trying to do is do a permanent one, in which case they were going to have to go through the outdoor dining permit process and go through that conditional use process. They wanted to sell alcohol out there, so it was a more drawn out. It was more. They were going to have to go through the formal process, and that's where they kind of backed off of it a little bit. We never told them that they had to get rid of their temporary one. They could use their temporary ones are still allowable based on our emergency ordinance that we have with the city. That hasn't been. We haven't gone out and started telling people that it's over. The temporary part's over. If you want to use these, you can become permanent. There are a couple businesses that are looking to make theirs permanent, in which case then at this point we really don't have any design guidelines. We would have to just do design reviews and go with that route. So, and I also want to make clear what we have in the parking lots. I don't consider those parklets. Those are individual outdoor dining areas for individual businesses. That's what those were. Those aren't what like parklets are usually used for. So they're a little different in that regard. I at least I see there's a difference in what they're doing in terms of outdoor dining as compared to what a parklet is. Because usually the outdoor dining is on their private property. It's with their own, on their own, right, with their business. And so that's kind of where with the parklet, it's more open to the public and not just the restaurants. Not to say that the restaurants wouldn't use them. The restaurants aren't open 24 hours a day. They're not open, they're closed usually on Mondays and Tuesdays and Sundays and Mondays. And so they would be utilized by the public, but they also would be utilized by the restaurants when the restaurants are open and people are going out there and using them. Yes. So that's what I mean by, but they have the ability to be used by the public as well.
Yeah. And I see sort of a contradiction there because we're requiring an applicant to bear the cost and the maintenance, but yet it remains as a public space. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of wondered that, if we're going to look at parklets, I think it should be for the community and with the cost borne by the city and maintained by the city, as opposed to this being a way of business to be able to expand the space of their business. at a minimal cost, while taking away, by taking away a public space, i.e. parking lots.
Right.
I'm kind of leaning right now, as you probably gathered, that I think it's a good idea to develop parklets, but I don't think that it should be identified. The cost should be borne by any individual business if it's going to be a community's spot. And just one last thing before I go, when I was looking at the street safety about roadways with 25 mile per hour miles speed limit, I'm kind of wondering if we should say or routes of regional significance, because specifically I'm looking at San Pablo Avenue, which is a heavy commute area where unfortunately a lot of people are going faster than 25 through our city, even though it's a speed limit. I wonder if we should restrict the parklets on roads of regional significance as well as the 25 mile an hour speed limit. Just because I know that there have been instances where cars have run into parklets with great injury and even deaths. And I think we should, envision them like Sue's place, where they're not on a main road.
Right.
As opposed to being on a road like San Pablo Avenue.
Right.
So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Frankie?
Thank you, Chair. The items I have for you, Dave, are along the lines of what Raphael was discussing earlier on the long-term maintenance. And so the angle that I'm looking at this from is if we have, let's say the business owner or the city, whoever it's going to be, installs a parklet, and then all of a sudden we find out that PG&E needs to get into it, or EBMUD, or any other, Verizon, AT&T, fiber optics in those streets.
Right.
We should probably, I would think it would be, if we're entertaining this, I think it might be a good idea to put in some guidelines that say, in the event of, and said entity needs to work in this area, please understand that we've got to have the right to remove that infrastructure so that whichever party needs to get in there, whether it be for 10 days, 30 days, 3 months, that we give ourselves an out option to address that.
Okay. Yeah.
Can we make sure to include that language?
Yeah, that's definitely I'm hoping that the commission recommends that this go to the ad hoc committee and we can get more in detail and depth in what these things would look like and how, because you have to be very careful where you place them because of all of the different public utilities that are all over the place, besides the drain inlets and the storm drain, the storm drain getting from the water from one point, you don't want it to stop at one and have to, go around and all that. So so that's why in most cases, like in these, you can see they've kind of taken up almost 3 parking spaces. These are pretty big.
Right.
Most of some of the other cities just require 1 parking stall. So that's a 9 by 18. So right. 18 feet by 9. So, in our case, or 9 by 20 in our case, so 180 square feet. So that if they're placed correctly, you won't have those issues. And they need to be raised up. As you can kind of see on all of them, they're sitting on some type of platform or they're up above the curb. Where drainage can get underneath there, and of course, there's going to have to be. I'm sure there's going to have to be some cleaning under there and being able to get under there to clean. You're going to have to.
Right.
Things will gather under there, garbage and all sorts of stuff. So,
right. It's just my angle on that was just that long-term maintenance.
Yeah.
Of somebody like a PG&E or an EBMUD or somebody that, for some reason they have a pipe break and we've got to take that whole infrastructure down for 3 months or 6 months.
Yeah.
As long as we have language in there to address that. Okay. The second part is the beautification. So if we could come up with a standardized way of addressing, I like some of the softer, trying to soften it up and add a little bit more detail. instead of just looking at the wooden barriers that we've seen in other cities.
Yeah.
If we can just add a requirement in there that they do need to add some type of beautification, whether it be plants, trees, whatever they want to do. But that would be rather important. And then the last one is the business costs. When we look at the square footage of what it takes for a business to have their business, whether it's in Old Town or anywhere else, the fact that we're allowing them to add 4 or 5 more tables, in my opinion, they should be willing to bear the cost for that. And if that's shared with the city and all of us get to use it, even better. But they know as well as we know, those of us, when you have any business, that just every square foot is another square foot that you can add another table, 3 more tables, 4 more tables. And when you average that out annually, that's significant. That's a pretty significant cost, which is why when we look at cities like Walnut Creek or San Francisco, they immediately move to that model to open up and give them additional ways to expand their business. So I think that could be a great way for us to increase our sales tax and give our businesses a better chance of success as well. So those would be the comments I have at this time. Thank you. Chair Tim.
I also wanted to mention that Commissioner Wong had to leave, so he left about 7:30 or so. So you guys needed to know that. Anyway, Anne?
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious why this came up. We don't have a huge need for this. If we have one at this current point, Sue's Place being that example, I'm wondering, did we just want to get ahead of it? Where in the city, where would we see parklets being developed?
Well, in most cases, there are some of the ones that have the temporary ones that want to create permanent places where people can eat outdoors, and that in the public parking lots, not so much on the street so much. I mean, and so, but in terms of in terms of making sure that there are some that do want to come out onto the street, that we've got guidelines and regulations so that if and when we either allow them to go on into parking lots or on the streets, we can consider them parklets or maybe just outdoor dining areas. So that's kind of what, and there's been kind of a push in more creating a destination in the downtown. And so as a part of that, sometimes parklets add to that ambiance in terms of, people being able to gather downtown and that type of stuff. So there's been a number of different things of why it's coming up and it surfaces. The majority of it has been the outdoor dining areas of getting them out of parking lots and kind of out where they, and because it takes some of the on-street parking instead of some of the off-street parking. It's just one of those. It's just one of those things. Or if we do allow them to be in parking lots, that they've got rules and regulations that they have to follow to make sure that we can, get them. We can get the people parked, and we can create dining experiences for residents and visitors alike. So.
Okay, so if we're thinking downtown, we're thinking Old Town.
Mm-hmm.
It was brought up, Sue's Place, that's the one option. Could, for instance, Tina's put one on Tennant, or Antlers? Those are those public parking spaces that are behind both of those establishments, Antlers and Tina's?
I want to say Tina's is. I think there is public parking back there. Antlers, I think the parking is necessarily for the businesses that are all along San Pablo, at least on the one side. So I do think the parking, it's not necessarily public parking, but it's parking for multiple businesses within that area.
Okay, so we're talking about a real small number of potential places where parklets would be developed, right?
Well, you could develop a parklet down by La Familia. You could out on the road. You can. Wait.
By La Familia, that's on San Pablo.
Yeah, if we don't allow them on San Pablo, we can also, there could be some side streets that aren't necessarily in the downtown that could be able to be used that for some of these restaurants to use, or just want to use other places.
I guess I'm just struggling with what the need is. Just thinking about what the specific, I mean, it seems like there's a whole lot of development and such like that going on right now that's taking up a whole lot of time. And for us to spend time on developing a set of regulations for a need that exists for maybe one or two options, I'm kind of struggling with that. I mean, I don't mind getting out ahead of the game, and that would be great, but I just see the opportunities for us actually using a regulation like this being very minimal. And we have one at this point that would be considered or maybe two if you consider Tina's being in a parking lot. So,
well, like right now, Antlers is in a parking lot. Mel's is in a parking lot.
You said that was a private parking lot,
right? But what I'm saying is they're in parking lots. They're taking up off street. They're taking up mandatory parking where other people are having to park somewhere else because these areas are being used for other uses besides parking. So that's,
right, but that would be a thing of you either have it or you don't, because the only other option for the Antlers would be on San Pablo Avenue or on Tennant, and Tennant's really squishy right there. I can't see how we'd be able to fit anything in. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, if we're not using, if we're saying that San Pablo's out, we're saying that we can't use San Pablo for any of this, then yeah, in some areas we're limited in terms of where we're at. However, I always say, however, there could be areas that do pop up, and I think that this just gives the city another avenue for businesses that don't have a lot of square footage inside. And that gives them another avenue to expand their businesses outside and to create, again, as part of the economic development package in terms of creating that destination. In terms of that, it gives the city at least some mobility and gives them the ability to approve these things. Because right now we don't. We have nothing in our code that would allow us that dictate guidelines or objective standards for any of these types of. So all of our conditions, all of our requirements would be subjective, not objective. So if they be proposed, or they're just not allowed, we just don't allow them. And once the temporary order is up, then everybody who has them, they're gone.
Okay, so outdoor dining, from what I understood you saying earlier about La Familia, is that right. Setting up an outdoor dining is different than setting up a parklet on a public, right?
Yes.
So those would be dealt with under a different part of the code. I'm thinking what Commissioner Current brought up as far as routes of regional significance and
right.
I would love to have any way to slow down traffic on San Pablo Avenue to 25 miles an hour. But I mean, realistically, that's not going to happen even through our best, little downtown area. I mean, if we could do that, on our little old town bit of San Pablo Avenue, but it's at this point, it's really not safe. So I guess I'm just questioning the importance of it. I really appreciate the thoughts about getting out ahead. The one that we do see is Sue's Place. And from what I understand, then if that is also, since it's on a public right of way, when they're not using that space, I can just go ahead and go in there and set up my chair and sit in there myself.
Well, what they have right now, there's no guidelines for it right now. What they have right there is existing, as temporary. So if they were to apply for one, we would have to go through a whole different design standard in that. But yes, they're only open from 10 to 2, right? So if they're not open and that area is available, yeah, you can go down, sit down, free, do whatever you need to do because it's not being used by the particular restaurant that's there.
Okay. All right. So anyway, I appreciate that. I think, I think sending it on to, the ad hoc committee, I just don't want to see us wasting a whole lot of time on something that's not going to be as important for our community. I think it has been a pandemic related thing. And actually in some communities, it's ended up being a real positive thing. And so, I can understand that, but I just don't see it happening as much in Pinole. And I don't know if that's just because I'm not, looking for the optimistic, positive things, or if I'm just being realistic in that. So, let's go ahead, send it to the ad hoc review committee, and then I'll continue to whine and moan there. Okay, Chair Banuelos, I'm done.
Okay, thanks. Adam?
Adam's absent.
Oh, is he? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. It leaves me. I have a lot of questions and comments on here. The first thing I wanted to talk about was what Dave Current mentioned earlier about, your comment about it being for all the businesses. And I really think if you set it up that way, you're not going to get any, because when you look at the parklets that you see in Berkeley and in Oakland and in San Francisco and Walnut Creek, they're put together by the out front of the restaurants that people are, those are the ones to put them out there. Some of these parklets have got a lot of different forms. We have the ones that you normally see. Mm-hmm. In Walnut Creek, they blocked off entire cross streets. And then out there, that's kind of like a, everyone gets to use it kind of thing, but they had to use a whole street to do it.
Right.
So I can see that as that. I'm kind of wondering what your definition of a parklet is, because what you're describing and what they seem to me be two different things. I don't see this as anything other than for restaurants. There might be, the occasional someone who, drags their stuff out there to sell, but, they can do that on the sidewalk. I think it's in Point Richmond, there used to be an antique store in the old firehouse that they drag their stuff out on the sidewalk. And that was the kind of a little event there for them, and it kind of attracted people to their business.
If you look at this parklet is diagonal. I mean, it's really set up more for people to sit than it is for people.
Yeah, to me, that's not usable for business. That's just extra seating. So to me, that's not a park. That's just miscellaneous seating. I guess what I'm thinking about is the reason why this occurred is, during the pandemic, people needed their restaurants open and they needed to have open air. And so, they came up with this idea to have it out, probably first on the sidewalk and then in the street. And the thing about that was people like eating outside. That's what's kind of perpetuated this. And right now we don't have that many, but it's kind of one of these things where, if you build it, they'll come, because I think if people know they could do it, they may be interested in doing it. So I think that's why we don't see it. It's because just people haven't really thought about it. Maybe didn't know they could. And in our case, it may not be just, downtown or wherever. I can see people trying to do this, like in the shopping centers on Fitzgerald. There's enough little places to eat up there and whatnot where they could do it out there in their sidewalks. That's going to be a whole other thing, because you'd have to get the permission of the people who run those shopping centers to allow it. And, sometimes they won't. I don't know if they'd go for it, really, just because they're, funny that way. What I've seen, and I've seen a lot of these, and this is something that's happening not in the architecture world, where people are talking about, how to make parklets not look like shanty towns. I was recently up in North Beach in San Francisco, and how there's a restaurant in every rentable space on the streets there. Right. But they built parklets in front of them. It looks like someone's waiting for the garbage to get hauled away. They're really, really look like they're about to fall apart, and they lose the identity of the restaurants because they're just a bunch of shacks going on for blocks and blocks. So to me, that's kind of like parklets gone wild. But and that's why I was kind of thinking that maybe should be some sort of minimal amount of regulation on how they look and maybe how big they are. But I really don't see this going for anything other than restaurants, which makes me think of a few things. And we mentioned some of them already tonight. One of the first things, the thing that was interesting about a lot of the parklets, I think of one particular in Berkeley, right in front of the UC campus, or about a block away from the UC campus, where it's really a bar with a restaurant, not a restaurant with a bar. Right. So you're drinking alcohol out in the street, where a lot of cities don't allow that. I was at one, like a little mixer thing in Oakland, in downtown Oakland, where it's kind of was the parklet was kind of like a straight version of your diagonal thing in your picture, but it was out in front of one particular bar. It was theirs. They put it up there, and I guess they got some okay for the city to let them to do it, and they put it up there. I don't think you're gonna, do. I kind of agree with Dave Curran. If you expect these things to be shared, the city's going to have to do them, which means they won't happen. And but if there are people that want to put them up and they're willing to pay for it, I think it should be exclusively for them. Otherwise, you're not going to get anyone that's going to want to do it. Let's see. So anyway, I kind of lost my point there in terms of, do we have to have some kind of thing to allow alcohol drinking in the street if you have it at the parklets?
Well, if you keep them only as, because in most of our furnaces, like in the downtown, like in Tina's, you can only have it in one parking stall. So we would be able to regulate that. If Tina's wanted to do one, let's just say on San Pablo, I'll just put it on San Pablo, and they wanted to do one at their own, then they would have guidelines. They would have guidelines that they would have to go by, and they would have to adhere to ABC laws as well if they were to serve alcohol outside.
So how have all these cities gotten around all those ABC laws? Because there are a lot of cities with a lot of bars with parklets out in front of them.
A lot of them, what they've done is the cities have allowed individual businesses to own these parklets. And so they've had to take the liability, and they're from the city as well. They'd have to indemnify the city because it's on city right of way, pretty much, or it's on the street. So there'd be a lot of indemnification agreements, and maybe Alex. I see Alex.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Dave. ABC also has modified its regulations pretty significantly since COVID began to allow more flexibility for outdoor drinking, consumption, for lack of a better word, similar to how they now allow, you buy to-go drinks. They've modified it somewhat for parklets that have, my understanding of regulations is they need to be somewhat self-contained. To have some sort of a barrier between the street and where the alcohol, but certainly what our regulations would simply state is that they, must comply with ABC regulations. And, if they're going to serve alcohol, they need to comply with the ABC license rules, which may change over time and may get stricter over time. I would note that part of our municipal code does prohibit the consumption of alcohol anywhere that's visible in public. So as part of this process, we may have either the council, modify that section, or simply, adopt a resolution clarifying that this, as long as the alcohol consumption is occurring in the parklet, and not on the sidewalk or outside the parklet, it doesn't violate that provision.
I think that you probably know that the rules that ABC has modified in order to allow them, is that just temporary? Is that just only during? So
it was originally emergency rules, and then the legislature passed the law extending it for, I think, another year through 2022. I don't know if they will do that again. There are ways to have drinking outdoors on patios, even under normal times. I'm sure some of you have seen outdoor patios where you see the signs that say, no alcohol behind this, beyond this line or beyond this gate. So there may be a way to modify, especially for those businesses that are perhaps in the parking lot or something like that, for them to put up a fence or do something that allows them, even under normal ABC rules, to serve alcohol in that space.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Obviously, this can turn into a multitude of regulating. It seems like, and it's actually, some of this is kind of beyond the Planning Commission. I believe. I think we should be thinking more of, because some of this is going to have to be decided by the council. But in terms of land use, and I think the definition of the guidelines that David is talking about, I think our purview on this would be, considering if we have to decide on a maximum size, whether we can cover them with a, like some kind of little roof on them, like you see in other places. Are they going to allow signage to identify the business? Is there going to be lighting requirements? The things like ADA and drainage, and that's kind of like a foregone conclusion. But that would have to be, there'd have to be some kind of verbiage about that, though, just so you have it, because you don't, just for both of those things. So I think we have to kind of make sure that we're, talking about the right stuff, and make sure that we're sending the things that have to be decided by the council to the council. Some of this more serious legalese is a council matter, not a planning commission matter.
No, I mean, they would all have to be approved by the council. I mean, we would be making recommendations to the council for approval.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but the things that we should be talking about, I think, are the actual impacts of use, as opposed to, can I have a couple of beers in the street? I mean, that's probably going to happen if you have one of these, until someone, tells you can't. I thought the idea about, San Pablo Avenue, not having them there or restricting them there, they're good. I think there's just something to that, but I kind of wonder whether that's where you would have, there might be more of a wish to have some there. What if, we allow this, and East Bay Coffee wants something there, what are they going to do? Any other businesses that may come along, well, Tina's would have hers in back like she did before it blew away. But I am not sure whether it would be, if we allowed this, and we restricted that, whether that would, do anything in terms of having it. I mean, that, other than of course, the traffic. I mean, the having it out there seems like a place to do it. There's always been some back and forth about traffic calming and things like that over the years. I think, David, we went through at least 2 different versions of that in our planning commission time, and it's just never gone anywhere, mainly because the businesses didn't want it to happen, because it affected loading and things like that, which may be a thing that may come up, if we allow parklets. Are we constricting the streets down so businesses that require loading from whatever street they're on now are blocking traffic? I can't say whether I've ever seen that happening in other cities. And I've certainly seen parklets on streets with bigger, more consistent traffic than we have downtown. But I just don't know. Most of the parklets I've seen are kind of side streets. At least the ones I've been at have been more like side streets or quieted down versions of main areas, So I'm thinking of those the ones, several of the ones I've been in
and one I go to all the time, in Berkeley. So I do think this would be a good thing for us to kind of look at in terms of the ad hoc committee, and maybe we can kind of come up with a group of guidelines that would pretty much kind of cover the majority of what people would want, and have a mechanism for if something comes up that we didn't think of. David, what right now, say if I had a restaurant on the street and I wanted to put tables out on the sidewalk right in front of my restaurant, what would be the process for doing that? Do I need to get a use permit for that, or is there some...
Yeah, you'd have to get an outdoor dining permit, and then, but I don't think our sidewalks are...
Well, not taking into account how wide our sidewalks are.
You need an outdoor dining permit, and then if alcohol were to be involved, you'd have to get a public convenience necessity letter approval from the council, as well as a conditional use permit. That's what we had to do for East Bay Coffee for their outside area on the side.
Oh yeah, okay. So if we had a mechanism for parklets, would we have to do the same thing?
Yeah, we'd do it under all one. Like we would do like on the sides, we would do a design review for that, and then a CUP and then a PCN.
Because I was thinking that, like when the council approves a restaurant that's or that has alcohol, it's a two-step process. First there's the ABC approval, and then there's the actual final approval of everything. It always seems like it's being done in two pieces.
Yeah, just because of the public convenient necessity letter, that has to be done by the council.
Yeah. And
once they approve that, then we can bring the conditional use permit back to the planning commission for their approval.
Okay. So I guess when I think of these things, it always one of these things where it sounds like it's a great idea, but then someone gets and tries to go do it and find out it's like you have to hire an attorney just to get your chairs out on the sidewalk. So I've got to figure some way to, if we're going to do this, let's not make it so encumbering of rules that people don't want to do it. And then the rules mean money. And it's just a massive fee onto this. I can understand having some minor fees for doing it, because, there's just going to be some city time involved, but it's very easy for these kind of things to kind of even get prohibitive, even after you spend the time trying to figure it out, but you put so many rules on it that you make it almost impossible to do. Right. So I think I want to, impress on everyone, if we do something like this, it's got to be straightforward and as simple as possible. And otherwise, we're not going to get them. And if that's our desire to have something like that, I mean, it's fun to sit outside in the street. I liked that area right in the middle of downtown Walnut Creek where they closed off about a block of Cross Street. And it's kind of like, now that's a place where it seems like it's open seating. There's a whole bunch of restaurants there and everybody can sit wherever they feel like it, Right. And it has this whole kind of street fair kind of feel to it, which is kind of nice. That's kind of like how they did it. Other places have them, each entity does their own thing in front of their place and they paid for it and they paid whatever permits they did and they put the money in to build whatever structures they have and whatnot. And so there is kind of a, I don't know if I want to say organic feel to it, but some sort of semi-traditional feel to having these things. And I think that's what people kind of attract themselves to. I would like to see this go through the ad hoc committee and see, take it for a spin, see what happens. I'd be curious to poll some of the local businesses and see, hey, if we had this, would you do it?
I mean, that's something that we can talk about, because I mean, I'm taking a look at from a regulatory standpoint. A lot of cities and counties are going in totally different directions. Like the city of San Jose, which is a fairly big city, has a 3-page parklet regulations. And a city of size of us of 40,000-30,000 has a 42-page requirement or 32, 42
Yeah,
pages.
you can't have that.
Yeah. So I mean,
it's got to be like a pamphlet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different. I mean, all the cities are different in how they regulate this, and so I mean, that's one thing I would take to the ad hoc committee as well is take a look at some of these different cities and what they're requiring and that's something. I do think that's what the ad hoc committee is for. I think that's is to ferret out some of these ideas to make sure if it's something that we really want to do, is it something that we can and then move forward and Parklets. I mean, like I said, it was inspired by the COVID-19, but there are areas like, for example, Bear Claw really doesn't have anywhere they have a little side area that they try to do an outdoor, but it didn't fit. There wasn't enough room on that alley side. They would benefit from something like that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there are some businesses that are entrenched in there. There might be some businesses, what I call the horseshoe, that restaurants that might be able to want to take advantage of that, or if and when there's a redevelopment of the area, who knows? And I think this is just another amenity that the city might be able to offer with a fairly decent sized regulation. If this is something you want to do, that we have it's another tool in our toolbox for economic development in that. And so that's kind of where, from staff's perspective, that's kind of where we're coming from, is to have another tool in the toolbox, so that we can attract maybe some small businesses. Maybe there are some other restaurants. We've gotten inquiries from brew pubs and wine tasting places, and so so we are getting those inquiries. And again, it's just if we have something like this and it's regulated and it's done properly, and I think it'd be an asset. So I mean, that's kind of where, and of course, COVID did spark it. I mean, it did, and some of the businesses that haven't done it were surprised in how people liked it when they were there. Mm-hmm. So, and they want to continue it. So I think that's another issue as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I could easily see somewhere like Parachute Bistro wanting something like that,
Yeah.
And it being, for them being successful.
Yeah.
So I do think it's something we should bring to the ad hoc committee and, see if we can figure it out, see where we go from that. So I'd be all for that.
Alex, I have one question for you on this. And that in some of these parklets, or what we have, I'll just call them outdoor, in the private parking lots, would we consider those necessarily parklets, or would we consider just those, or as to regulate those as similar to parklets, or because parklets are mainly more on the public right of way than in the quote in the parking lot.
Well, a parklet can be whatever we
define it
as. So we could have different regulations for people in parking, or parking lot or not. But we would need to adopt something for them to do that, because those are, like you mentioned, those are required parking spaces.
Right.
And it doesn't conform with our current code for them to have a permanent, presence in the parking lot. So we would need to address something to handle that. But if we might have different requirements. It's certainly possible to have different standards. I don't know if they would be laxer or maybe more strict, or who knows. But
okay, I just want to make sure.
I also think, though, even whether they're in a parking lot like that, taking spaces, or on the street, whatever aesthetic requirements that we come up with, they should be pretty similar, if not the same.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's all I have. Does anyone else have anything that they want to add to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I do. This is Dave Current. I have my hand up, by the way. This is one of these things, the parklets, when it came to me, I said, these are great ideas. They really worked out really well during the pandemic. But I'm now realizing that the law of unintended consequences has come into play. And that is that when we allow businesses to build these parklets out in the street, that's really an unfair giveaway of public property. to these businesses, even though they're paying the cost. They're not really compensating the public for those uses. And that could have effect. Like, for instance, you mentioned the Bear Claw. What happens if the Bear Claw puts one of these out in San Pablo Avenue? Well, Tina's is competing with the Bear Claw. Tina's is paying for a large space to attract their customers, where the Bear Claw is constrained, and all of a sudden the Bear Claw would get this windfall of an area that they put minimum investment in. And I think that would be really unfair to like Tina's if like the Bear Claw were to do. I'm just using that as an example. The other thing is that I know in Livermore, I think it was, where they had parklets, the non-restaurant businesses were very much against them because they said, hey, our customers don't have a place to park and we're losing businesses. So I think that, that we have to be sensitive to the fact that, taking away public parking spots is going to impact businesses that do not have the parklet. And the other thing too is this whole murky thing about ownership. Like, for instance, let's take Sue's place, for instance. What happens if a food truck decides to park next to Sue's place and starts selling its own food, saying, oh, you can go sit in Sue's place because it's community property? What kind of issues is that going to cause? Is Sue Place going to go like, hey, that's ours, but it's not? I just see so many questions of ownership and investment coming up, where something that seems like a really great idea just has so many complications to it that are far from being resolved. And I think that this worked out well during the pandemic. The restaurants needed these things during the pandemic. But now that we supposedly are past that, I just think this is an idea that should just die, because I think there's just too many issues that I think could be unresolved about how do you handle the ownership aspect of this and the responsibility and the control. If they're community property, it's open for anybody, and that's just going to cause all kinds of problems. So that's my piece.
Well, I think on that though, if they're paying for it, it's their use. They'd be paying for the construction. They'd be paying some sort of.
But they're not buying the property, Tim.
No, but they're going to be paying a permit of some sort, and they're going to have to pay for a process to the city for that.
But they don't own it.
Well, I just don't. If it were me, if it wasn't for my own exclusive use of my business, I wouldn't do it.
I mean, Alex, you can maybe say it's who owns it.
Well, the public right-of-way belongs to the city, so the city can decide who can use it and for what purpose. The city council could certainly decide that someone needs to pay rent for an exclusive permit fee, or they could decide that the other benefits that may come from a parklet, justify it at no rent. That would really be a decision for the city council to decide. But they could structure it either way. I know cities have done it in both ways.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I guess no one else has any.
You've got two other commissioners that had their hands up. I think it was Rafael Menez and then Frankie Martinez.
Okay, I can't see any of this hand raising thing.
There you go. So Rafael had his hand up
go ahead,
a long
Rafael.
time ago. So.
Right. Thank you. And so I actually wanted to reply to your comments earlier with regards to the basically traffic impacts of having the parklets on San Pablo Avenue and whether it would be worth the risk. I think it's worth considering these parklets, not just within the tragedy of the commons context of whether or not they're public or private or quasi-public spaces, but also in terms of the impact they can have on traffic. Because if you have things like those signposts you see on the top left image on that slide there, you have other things that make it stand out in traffic. I think that depending on the particular design of the parklet, it could potentially have a traffic calming effect in ways that we couldn't ordinarily do on San Pablo Avenue in Old Town because it's a route of regional significance, so we can't do things like speed bumps and so on and so forth. But even at the most basic level, just the visual disruption of having something different there rather than just car, and then, oh, wait, this is something completely different. It's going to draw the driver's attention to it. It's going to make them slow down and react because they're seeing something different and they're adjusting to it. So I think it's worth considering in terms of land use, the potential transportation impact, though I don't want to necessarily impinge on the transportation's committee's territory, but I think in terms of land use planning, there's potential beneficial traffic calming impacts that parklets could possibly have if they're designed correctly, I think.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, in my dream land, that would be something that would happen, right? That would be a way that we could slow traffic down that we're not allowed to do it in any other way. The question is one, if there's a real desire for that from the restaurants that are along San Pablo, because it is so loud. And two, would we be able to get that past Caltrans, something like that, the whole, so I would almost even kick this back to David Hannum. I mean, as far as San Pablo Avenue, if that would even be possible to ask, Caltrans to work with there. But, if we want to develop something that's just a 3-pager and, gets the adjacent businesses sign-offs and all that kind of stuff, great. But I totally agree with you, Commissioner Menez. I just don't know if it's realistic at this point. So I appreciate your comment.
Well, there are a lot of cities that have San Pablo Avenues in them. Oakland, El Cerrito, Albany, that have parklets on the street on San Pablo Avenue, and it's still it's the same street of regional significance there as it is here. In fact, it's busier. I think I appreciate what you said, Raphael. To me, that makes sense in terms of what you're talking about. It's it's going to be there's a potential for the feel of what an area could be is there. So, who else had their hand up?
Frankie.
Okay,
I did.
Frankie.
Thank you, Chairman Bellows. I guess my perspective on this is, and going into the city quite a bit, right on Market Street, which is San Francisco's one of its busiest streets, including streets like Fillmore, they have parklets on every one of those major arteries. Mm-hmm. And with hundreds of thousands of cars going through those thoroughfares every single day, much more than what we have. And it's been my opinion also, I always get the sense that it does have that calming effect because you do slow down. Everybody's slowing down, not only looking for parking, but just the different lighting and that whole feel of it, if you will. So I definitely have an interest in at least exploring this to see what the possibilities are. Maybe we decide that, maybe it's not the right fit, but I think it's a good idea to at least look at it, would be my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything more to add? Hearing none.
Chair, I don't believe there's any members of the public in attendance.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know if we got any comments.
Yeah,
Dave,
David,
I don't have anything with me unless Justin's got something with him.
No, I don't see anyone on the line.
Okay. Yeah, I would be curious to see what the businesses thought of this, and I would not just in Old Town, but I would talk to people on Fitzgerald, and because they're going to have a whole different view of things. But I can see them saying, "Oh yeah, we could put here in the parking lot if the ownership would allow it." I mean, they kind of do it now in some places out there. They have just wide sidewalks and they put a couple tables out there. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they're just doing it, and just no one said anything about it. So, anyhow. I guess you'll let us know in terms of an ad hoc meeting pivot and we'll.
Yeah, I'll send out something. I'll send out some times for next week.
Okay.
Because I also have some other items for the ad hoc committee to look at as well, development review oriented. So look, I don't know if Thursdays are good days for everybody. Is that a pretty good day for everybody?
That'd be okay. That'd be okay for me.
Okay. So look for some Thursday dates coming in your email probably tomorrow.
Okay.
And then we'll get together.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, we have city planners and commissioners reports. David, do you have anything?
I just have a couple of things that are going on. It looks like we're probably going to be getting Appian Village to you guys on the 11th. That's what we're going to have, and hopefully we'll have 2801 Pinole Valley Road to you guys by the end of April, and then probably Pinole Vista at the beginning of May. So we're getting all the reports in for all the studies or for all the projects. We're finalizing the stuff for Appian Way, I'll be getting that staff report to Lily and Alex hopefully by the end of this week. So look for that one, Alex. And so there we've gotten some inquiries. Just to let the commission know, we've gotten more inquiries about more residential, more commercial businesses along San Pablo, along Pinole Valley Road. So there's a lot of interest out there. We're getting a lot more inquiries about properties and what people can do on properties and what's the mixed use, how does the mixed use components work. So we're getting a lot of that. We've got our first community meeting for our housing element. Slated for April 27th. So that's a community workshop. It looks like so you'll get some more information later, probably later this month regarding that. So moving forward with those, we are. Let's see what else. Vista Woods is moving along slowly but surely, but they're moving. And we've gotten some feedback on Pinole Square, and they're moving forward with their building permit package. So, and their final map package. So we're looking forward to getting those things, getting those projects going again. So looks like building's going to be hopping here in the next probably 3 to 6 months, and beyond. And then from a planning perspective, as part of the housing element, we also are doing work on the safety element and creating an environmental justice element. So the planning commission will be very much involved in those, in development of those as part of the housing element update. And so other than that, that's all I have. Oh, I do have some updates from the last meeting, regarding this tree in front of the realty business. They are working on the grate. They've had issues with getting a grate that's similar to what is, because when I talked to Joe, it's similar of what's out on the rest of them. And so now it's a question of, do they just get that grate, or do they wait until they get one made that's similar to the other grates that are along with the other trees? And they're also working on an agreement between the property owner and the city regarding watering, and because we can't get water directly to it. So there's some agreements where, the city would maintain it with them paying for that. So there's an agreement that's being worked out on that for that project. And I think that's all I have. I'm sure Ann will remind me of the other ones that I got updates on. So that's all I have right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if there's been anything that we've approved that's made it to plan check yet. So it looks like there have been. So.
Yeah, I mean, the houses that you guys approved have all gotten a plan check. Vista Woods has gotten their plan check. The only one that's still and has their permit. The only one that's still out there is Pinole Square. They're still out there, and there's a couple of minor CUPs that are out there that are. We're working with the ones on 2337 San Pablo, the outdoor market. We're working with them and getting their stuff done. And they're moving forward. We finally, I think, got interest to the easement issue. There were some easements out there, city easements regarding some properties and stuff. And I think the public works director and the property owner have gotten together and are finalizing those types of things. So we're moving forward on those.
Have we made any progression on the Old Town specific area plan and guidelines and whatnot?
I'm gonna leave that to Alex.
Yeah. So we have been looking into some issues about how SB 9 applies in some other similar rules regarding streamlining housing and particularly non-objective standards, and to the extent they can be applied. Recently, just so everyone knows, the Attorney General, it was in different context, but they had sent a letter to Pasadena about how their implementation of SB 9 had, in the way they were broadly classifying landmarks districts was violating state law. So we are it seems like this is a distinguishable situation, because ours is pretty, the intent was relatively relaxed. They're not super strict requirements, but we just are, have been firming that up and want to be confident in it before we bring that to the city council.
Okay. So they were saying in Pasadena that Pasadena said, we're a city full of landmarks and we can't do this.
Yeah, I mean,
they are a city full of landmarks.
Yes. Well, they had, in implementing SB 9, they had prohibited those SB 9 projects within their landmarks districts. And like many districts, their landmarks districts included many historic structures, but because you don't establish the landmark district until, recently or within the last, 30 years, it's natural that there's a high percentage of the district that isn't historic in itself or have anything. And they had the Attorney General was expressing that was problematic, but as we looked more into it, it seemed like it was really only as applied to their attempt to limit SB 9 in those areas, which is not something we've attempted to do in our ordinance at all. So it should be fine.
Okay. Do you guys have anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. First of all, actually, a lot of them have been addressed, so I really appreciate that.
We're in communication now, by the way. So.
Yeah. I do have a question regarding the citizens to be heard from last meeting. I guess it's Tony Vosbrink had brought up numerous concerns, and I was just wondering about the status of his requests, especially regarding the lighting on Pinole Valley Road. I'm not worried about the creek or anything like that, but mostly about that lighting in PG&E. Were you able to follow up on that at all?
Yeah, the PG&E, that's something that they're working on. They've had a lot of issues with transformers down there. And so they're working on trying to get a better delivery system down there. And so it's taking a little longer than it should. They're supposed to be done with their work here in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully everything starts getting quote back to normal the way it was supposed to be. But I do have an email into Jamie already. She's our public works analyst and inspector. And so I'll meet with her tomorrow and get a finalization of where they're at. When I talked to her last month after our meeting, she wasn't sure how long she thought it was going to take them 3 to 4 weeks to finish all that, but I'll follow up with her to see if that's still consistent, because they should be done. They should almost be done. All that information.
Okay, that's good. So I hope that Mr. Vosbrink and his neighbors can see that, and I really appreciate you following up on that. So thank you. I'm also wondering, Chair Banuelos, we had spoken quite a long time ago about the possibility of our discussing and asking Mr. Hannum to put items on the agenda for future agendas. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if there was still the desire for us to be able to do that as a commission.
Yeah, I would think so. This would be the point in our meeting that we would do it. If anyone had seen something or had an idea, or this, where we are right now is when we would do it. It's very similar to how the city council does it.
Okay, actually, they moved theirs, I think, to the very core part of the meeting. So it used to be at the end, but then they changed it. So I'm not sure about that. So is there anything that we need to do then, as far as if we'd like to request items to go on the agenda? Just that we need to be in agreement within our commission and then pass that on to Mr. Hannum, or is there anything else?
We will double check the Plan Commission's bylaws and make sure nothing there has to be changed. We may need at the next meeting to bring back, for approval, a change to the Planning Commission's agenda format, since it should really be a specific thing. And the normal process would be, it would take a majority of the Planning Commission to add something to a future agenda item. And I would just add, I think this is something that Dave will probably, depending on the item, need to still run by by Lily and the city manager, just because they and or the council may, and not to say this is the items that you would be asking for, but may not want the city staff to be spending time and resources on certain items like that. So
yeah, I would take that. So if you have items that you want, I would take those to Lily and let her know that this is what the Planning Commission wants to put on their agenda, and this is and give her an idea of what timelines are going to be in that. So, but yeah, we would definitely do that.
Would it make a difference whether it was something that we have to vote on versus like a discussion of something? Or would they be the same in terms of the process?
No, I think if it's something that, if it's just a discussion item, I don't think that, I would just take it to Lily and say, look, the Planning Commission wants to discuss this at their next meeting, yada, 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 whether it's an ordinance or whether they just want to take a look at, a specific part of the code, specific part of the general plan, sort of that nature, or whether you want to really, if you want to do some real changes in any of the documents that we have, or do something of that nature, then so there would be kind of a different process, but
okay.
So.
Okay, that's great. I just know that we had brought it up before, and I just wanted to make sure that we do see, and I don't even have anything in particular in mind.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure that we do have the avenue to do that, especially as we're getting, all of these developments coming up and such. There might be some specific things. So, okay. And another thing that we've talked about many times is having a joint Planning Commission City Council meeting. And I know that the City Council has also brought that up. There are things that we think about with developments happening, concern for safety, things that we've talked about in terms of Vista Woods, their safety for seniors and things like that, that we need to be thinking about in the broader sense, that the City Council would obviously have jurisdiction on that. So I was wondering what the status was of
well, I know Lily and Andrew have been talking about that. And I think we're potentially scheduling a joint meeting for the housing element. So there might be something. I'll have to check with Lily on that to see if we can put other things on that agenda or for discussion points or something of that nature. But I know they've been talking about it. I just don't know what the final outcome of that has been.
Okay. All right. Just so long as we will hopefully have that happen. And I just had a question. You mentioned the outdoor market. Is that the one on San Pablo Avenue near Tenant that
Yeah, the one next door to
we approved and
Raquel Contreras' property.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about earlier.
Okay. Whoa. Okay. Coming back, right? Let's see. I think that's it. Just wondering about the status of the sprouts trees and where those might go and such like that. Just to make sure that we don't lose that.
No, I'm working with the developer right now. Some of the agreements that Tamara made before she left with the developer, we're working on basically expanding the landscaping of the median, and that's kind of where all of that extra quote mitigation is going to. Is what we're going to go back and redo or refurbish the median, and then they are going to do the park bench part by the creek, or some type of bench or place where somebody can sit down. We talked about doing stone and other types of materials. So I'm working because there's a bond on that. There's a bond on all that. So the developer wants to get rid of the bond. So we're kind of holding the bond hostage until we get what we need out of the developer. So I had some estimates for the landscaping in the median, and so I'm getting those estimates to them, and once we agree upon that, then you'll start seeing movement in the median.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, that's good to hear. I think all of my other questions and thoughts like that have been addressed, so I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
No problem. Before you go to the next commissioner, I did want to bring up one thing I forgot to bring up, is that I have been working with the owners of the bowling alley, and based off of the planning ad hoc committee comments regarding the colors of the building, we have pretty much we worked with them. I worked with them on the color scheme of Gateway. And so we've come up with a color palette for the bowling alley that will be consistent with the color scheme of the Gateway Center. So
that sounds pretty disappointing.
Huh?
The whole place is going to look like Sherbert, huh?
Well, no, I mean they're going to do. I think their design is going to be a little more different based on what they last presented. I think there's going to be a little more bold, a little more, but it'll be within the color schemes that it'll be within the colors that are within the Gateway Center.
Oh, okay. Because I think that's all pretty awful, actually.
So but I know the ad hoc committee wanted it to be. I know the ad hoc committee wanted to be consistent with that. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're headed with. So.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any communications they want to add?
Yeah, I have something real quick. This is Dave Current. I believe that the officers of the Planning Commission's terms are expiring in April. So I think it's important for David to put on either the 11th agenda or later about the appointment of the chair and vice chair in the standing committee.
Yep. Yeah, we will be. So that's coming. That's on our. That'll be on our. Probably it'll be on the meeting on the 25th. So okay. I got that dialed in. But
great.
Reminder.
I have.
Is there anyone who's terming out?
Simon. I think Simon is in the process of terming out. And I think he's the only one. I think Dave is next year.
Yeah.
There's a couple of you next year. So I will be. You'll be getting that as part of the staff report of the next meeting. So.
Great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kern.
This is Commissioner Mess. I just had a brief comment about Vice Chair Moriarty's points about having additional items added onto the agenda. I just note that if we're going to be adding on additional items to the agenda, we should consider the overall net time that we have available, because we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff coming up before us over the next few months. The major projects that I've already mentioned, and above and beyond that, the housing element, the safety element, and the environmental justice element, I imagine, are all going to take significant amounts of time and probably multiple meetings each. So we should consider sort of our time limits when considering what items we want to add to the agenda, because I know that at the city council level, at one point, they were going back over their agenda items the council had suggested and sort of categorizing them and classifying all of them. I think there was something on the order of 35 items that hadn't been assigned yet, but the council had to go over and locate within their agenda. And our focus is obviously more narrow, but I think it's something we should consider as well, sort of our limits.
Well, keep in mind that just because we bring that up, it's not going to happen the next meeting. I mean, these are things that are months and months ahead of time, most likely. Especially, like you said, with our load that we're going to have here.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that the process allows us to do that, because in the essence, I mean, we do represent the citizens of Pinole, and so there needs to be a way for us to, within the confines of what the system is, to be able to make sure that if there are things that come up that are addressed, that we can do them. But it's all dependent upon the commission agreeing to do that, obviously with the majority, and we'll leave it to Mr. Hannum and Mr. Mogg to figure out what the legality of that is and how that goes. So there's like I said, I don't have anything on the agenda or anything on my plate that I'm thinking of. I just want to make sure that we have the process available to us.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that having the process available to us is a bad thing. I'm just saying we should be wary about how we use it once it exists.
That's not that hard. So, all right. Is that it? Anybody have anything else? Hearing none. This is the end of the meeting. Our next meeting, which I'm hearing may be on the premises, this may be our last Zoom meeting.
Yeah, that's one thing I forgot to ask before you adjourn. We will be having a hybrid meeting next month, so do expect to come back into the chambers. I'll be working with Heather. Justin and I will be working with Heather to make that work. So, so you'll be getting more information over the next couple of weeks of how this is all going to work. So,
okay, that sounds good. And that meeting is going to be, right now it's scheduled for April 11th, 2022 at 7 p.m. Mm-hmm. And with that, I adjourn the meeting.
Great. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night. Okay.